fusing architecture, storytelling, and technology. This is Fusion, the Electrosonic podcast, breaking down the art of engineering and creating lasting experiences through Pro AV. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Fusion, an Electrosonic podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Litwin, the voice of B2B. And folks, thanks so much for joining us on another episode of the show. We appreciate you listening along to some Electrosonic thought leadership. As you're listening to our conversation today, make sure that you're subscribing to the podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you just look up Fusion or Electrosonic, you'll find a full catalog of previous episodes as well as notifications when we drop new ones. And you can also head to our website, electrosonic.com, for more information on our solutions and services, our methodologies, and also more Electrosonic content like podcasts, videos, and more. So on today's episode of Fusion, we're exploring the long-awaited return of briefing centers, and more specifically, how briefing centers can be that exciting, cutting-edge, engaging space that guests will remember in 2021. After a year of almost completely virtual experiences, the business professional is ever more eager to be wowed by the physical environment, or is at least set up to be wowed by the physical environment. So today we want to ask, how can businesses take advantage of that lull and turn their briefing spaces into unique, one-of-a-kind experiences? And what is the value of that sort of investment? Where do you start? What kind of technology will best support a cutting-edge briefing room of today and tomorrow? Well, here to give insights is Electrosonic's resident briefing center expert and experienced technology consultant, Mr. Sean McChesney. Sean, great to have you on. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Daniel. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure getting to chat, and I'm looking forward to getting your thoughts on this because I feel like as businesses open back up, the briefing center may not always be top of mind as the space to invest in to really revitalize the in-person experience. But as we're going to discuss and unpack today, there's so much potential there and so much potential to be innovative and creative and really make for unforgettable experiences in a space that is as much an experience as it is a functional space as well. So let's start by unpacking your background a little bit. I want to give our audience a good understanding of it as we get deeper into this. So you've been in location-based experiences for over 10 years, almost 15 years, and you've been delivering on some of Electrosonic's most iconic award-winning projects since about 2013. You've worked live production as well with PSAV, and you have a Master's of Entertainment Technology from Carnegie Mellon. Robust experience here. So in those 10 to 15 years of personal and professional experience with the experience industries, I'm curious how the role of the briefing center has evolved in your eyes. Has it always been so experience-focused or a place with latent opportunity? Has it been more functional in the past and now is evolving into this direction? Give us that timeline of briefing center evolution since you've been in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. But, I think first and foremost, I would argue that it's always been about the experience. The technology has evolved, the architecture and the spaces and the purpose has evolved from a brand standpoint. But really, if we imagine for a second the amount of work that goes into planning and hosting a briefing, on top of all the work that goes into planning and creating a space that's capable of holding such a briefing, at the center of all that is the guest experience. Will the guests, the customers, those VIPs, are they going to enjoy their time with us today? Whatever the business goals may be for these spaces, they only stand a chance for success if the experience is a positive one.
What are some of the specific ways you've seen briefing centers evolve in those 15 years? Are there methodologies, technologies, use cases that have become really central to the purpose or the use of briefing centers?
The synonymous death by with PowerPoint is certainly something that has influenced a lot of how we all give presentations, in the modern business world. So previously, briefings would have been that one-to-many presentation, that one-to-many overview or insight into the brand, the organization. But I think engagement in the way that the customers coming into the space, engagement and agency that those guests have on the products, the ability to interact with the product or the brand, to speak with different groups of subject matter experts. I think it's in its entirety a bit more of an immersive experience, in the sense that you're coming into a space and you, as the customer, as the guest, as the VIP, have a very important role to play. And that goal of coming in and imparting your perspective and your beliefs and your use case of a certain product or service, I think has really driven that engagement from the owners of the goods and services to those they're trying to impart.
Now, if we take that evolution and make it even timelier, since COVID hit, now that we're practically a year out, I'm curious how COVID has shaped the state of the briefing center as it stands today. Maybe more specifically, how did the pandemic reshape the purpose and viability of the briefing center, as well as how much businesses even value the space in the first place?
Since COVID hit, obviously we were not able to use the physical environment. And so
Right.
much of the investment and a lot of where the ROI would be captured is in that physical space. So there's been a lot of good transitions and good adaptations to sending out care packages and hosting virtual meetings and getting guests and customers to be engaged with the brand, although they cannot physically be in that space. Out here in California, most of these briefing centers are still turned off. Throughout the country and the world, even if they are open, it's likely at a significantly reduced capacity. So being able to get people into the space is a lot more meaningful. Globally, travel is still certainly difficult between countries. Who can fly where? How long do they need to stay? If there are restrictions in place. So in terms of the physical space, I think it's more or less on hold and starting to reopen. And I think after a year of virtual meetings, virtual briefings, we're longing for that human connection, to be in a physical space. I was in a briefing center here in California yesterday. There were 3 other people and all the lights were turned off. It was a bit of a surreal experience to see such a lively, engaging environment be so dormant.
Do you think that the lack of in-person capacity has put the briefing center back in businesses' minds as a place that they want to invest in? Basically, do you think that lull has encouraged or discouraged businesses from viewing the briefing center as a space of innovation and investment?
It's likely both. But I would say I feel optimistic about the value that a briefing center holds for an organization. And I do think those with established briefing programs are going to find new and creative ways to use that space. I do think there's potential for, an internal facing aspect perhaps. But in cases where someone was looking or planning to open a briefing center just prior to COVID, I do think there's still a lot of value in that type of space. And I do think that these brands and organizations are going to find perhaps even more increased value out of those in-person engagements, those interactive settings, and ultimately hosting those briefings.
Obviously, for any physical space that is being brought back to full capacity, there are still questions around safety. How have you seen briefing centers adapt to the safety concerns of COVID? And do you think that they're still going to be able to have the same sort of high-touch experiences that we may have seen before?
So there's been an amazing amount of adaptations, both on the analog and digital sense, to make safety concerns front of mind, and equally as important, everyone's unique comfort level. So in the ABPM summer session, there's a wonderful example of colored wristbands that were available at check-in. Each color denoted a person's comfort level with shaking hands, standing in groups, being in an elevator. That's such an easy, simple, identifiable way to make sure that me as the guest feels comfortable in the space. I may want to go out and view a briefing or partake in a briefing, but I may have a different comfort level. So there's very analog, simple ways to approach that I've seen pop up. And as for, high touch, there are new products on the market, such as Free Touch, which allows you to interact with touchscreens and existing displays in a briefing center, but it lets you use your own device in your phone as the touch interface. So there's these creative ways that help with allowing the function of the space to remain the same, but again, allowing guests to kind of stick within their comfort zone, within their bubble, if you will. And ultimately, I think the general cleanliness of spaces is much more of a focus than perhaps it was over a year ago. So going through and sanitization, cleaning of these spaces, of any touch environments, I think that all those aspects are really going to point to a safe in-person engagement.
Can you break down what some of those high-touch experiences that had been staples of briefing centers were? Basically, what are those core technologies that often shape the briefing center, and which you think are going to return in some fashion, and which you think are now going to basically be unable to be administered at scale because of a cultural and a safety and health shift because of COVID?
Yeah, I think the most common type of touch experience you see is a touch display, whether it's, LED or LCD, whether it's a touch overlay or something of that nature. Physically touching a screen like you might do in a self-checkout line at a grocery store, that kind of touch experience may be a bit worrisome for some guests. But there are ways to get around that. There's ways to let them use their cell phone device as the interface, so they still have an opportunity to explore that content. We see applications where perhaps it's the timeline of a company history. While guests are waiting in the lobby, they can, cycle through all the years and look at all the different products they've created or something of that nature. So touch experiences, when it's one-to-one on a touch display, certainly I think it's going to be difficult to convince somebody to put on a VR headset or some kind of AR goggles. Those types of experiences may have just been set back a bit more than they already were.
All right, now let's shift a little bit here and look at how briefing centers are going to have to adapt to the end users, the audiences that will be funneling in and out of them. So obviously physical experiences have quite a bit of challenges today, but one of the most pressing is recapturing the audience's attention, because in a lot of ways, daily conveniences, daily experiences have been normalized in a digital landscape and have been turned into more on-demand experiences. So things move a little faster, things move in a slightly more personalized way for the end user. So when we're looking at something like a large briefing center that has multiple people funneling in and out and is meant to be a collaborative but flexible and customizable space, I think that poses a lot of fresh challenges. So I'm curious, on the other hand here, a year of no physical experiences, I think, has also left people thirsting for something fresh. So you've got both that lull and that latent, please let me get back to physical spaces, let me travel,
Yeah.
let me collaborate. So balancing those two things, has a year of isolation and quarantining lowered expectations of guests and built up their expected want to go to an in-person experience? Is it one or the other? Yes or no? What are your thoughts?
So I'm not sure if it's raised or lowered expectations, perhaps both, and use case or individual perspective, but I do think that it's been simplified. And the phrases that I hear often are, I just want to sit at a dinner table with people. I just want to talk face to face. I just want to write on a whiteboard and collaborate with my colleagues. I don't want to have to worry about COVID. I don't want to have to worry about talking through a computer screen and interrupting, or you go first, or I think you're muted. So I feel like what people are going to look for is just a more simplified, quality human interaction. So come in, sit down, let's discuss, let's collaborate, let's imagine, let's brainstorm, let's talk about the possibilities and simply enjoy that human connection. I do think again, I'm coming from a technology standpoint, but I do think that human interaction is what we're always looking to facilitate. So I think at the onset of, reopening and getting back into in-person briefings, it's going to be a bit more of let's just look at each other and have a conversation. I will say, though, I do think we are a bit of creatures of habit. And once that rush of in-person, human briefings, like human briefings come back, I do think it's going to start to find its way back to what are those elevated experiences, what are those digital touch points that we see through a lot of these briefing programs. What is that engagement? How do I interact? How do I play with the information, the content, whatever that may be? And then eventually, maybe in a year's time, there's going to be a new balance from where we were a year ago to this midpoint of purely human discussion, totally digital experience. I think that midpoint may shift from where we were a year ago.
Right. The pendulum will settle somewhere else, basically.
Certainly. Yep.
And Sean, I guess as we wait for that pendulum to settle, we're left with questions around what will actually make for a differentiated briefing center experience, or really just a physical in-person experience at all. So what are your thoughts there? I guess once the end user is satiated with just being able to get back out there, and now the quality of the experience, the small changes from functionality to technology integrations to high-level experiences, once all those things start to influence decision-making process for we want to book here, or we don't want to book here, or this impressed me, or this didn't impress me, what do you think are going to be those differentiating factors for the end user in briefing centers moving forward, and why?
Yeah, so I think, they're going to be, as they're going to be focused on what is it they're trying to get out of that experience. And we talk a lot about making memorable experiences where your guest is coming in and they have an expectation. And for you to understand that expectation, a lot of that is about the communication and the relationship you have with that customer. So when they're coming into your space, the expectation is I'm going to be sold something. They're going to try to show me something flashy. I'll either like it or I won't. And then I need to get home at the end of the day. So I think what briefing centers have done really well, it's worked to understand the reason for that engagement. And I think the exceptional briefing centers have been doing this for a long time, and they're going to continue to do that. And that's really what's going to separate mediocre experience versus an exceptional one. When we look at the theme park side of it, they have millions of guests worldwide that visit their theme parks every day. They have no idea, for the most part, why those guests are there. Is it to eat the food? Is it to ride the rides? If so, which ride? In a briefing center, everyone that comes through the door is there for a reason. And I think it's about understanding that purpose and that reason for the visit, and making sure that the engagement style, whether it is more analog, whether it's more in person, or whether it is a highly digitized experience, I think needs to match the type of brand and the type of experience you're trying to create that best delivers your message.
And just to get your opinion on this, do you think that briefing centers are going to be able to meet those changing expectations? I guess both with the responsibility coming from the businesses to envision their space to be that way, and also for the third-party partners and providers like an Electrosonic to help envision them and bring them to life.
Yeah, it's an exceptional group of people who run these briefing programs. And again, it's about listening, engaging, and understanding the client's needs. It's about understanding, their comfort level. As much of that information that we can find out ahead of time, both ahead of designing and building a briefing, but also ahead of each individual briefing, it's going to help those experiences be impactful and be meaningful, be comfortable, but really be engaging and maintain the value that they had pre-COVID. I certainly do think if there's any group that can meet and change, or meet that changing expectation, it's certainly this one.
All right, we're going to get into a little bit of sociology here, so we're going to have some fun with it. Yeah. So The way end users interact with their space, I think, motivates a lot of the technology decisions as well as the strategy decisions for how to reimagine a briefing center. So when we look at how much an end user wants to escape from reality a bit, do you see end users being more inclined to buy or interact positively with a space that is entertaining them rather than informing them? Like, do you feel like they still need that reprieve or that escapism of the space, of the experience to be front and center, or do you think it's going to be more balanced?
Yeah, all I know for sure is that nobody likes to be sold. Again, death by PowerPoint, used car salesmen, they all kind of fit into this answer. But really, outside of that, it's understanding that time is valuable and looking at how best to deliver your brand messaging. Depending on the brand, it may be more appropriate to entertain rather than to inform. Disney, for example, is the pinnacle of entertainment. So leading an end user to purchase a Disney product or experience, it's probably better to show them a level of entertainment that they're likely to get by purchasing your product. Here in Silicon Valley, however, there may be briefings focused on highly technical solutions, which require great deals of information and understanding and engagement from the customer to make sure that they understand all of the information that you've just given them. And really, those customers are going to make a highly informed purchasing decision. So it doesn't mean that, entertainment cannot be informative and that sharing information needs to be lacking of entertainment. I think there is a large spectrum there. And really it's about looking at your products and your services and finding that right balance. Certainly everyone likes to be entertained. People like to have fun. But at the end of the day, it's about what is the mindset that's going to drive that purchasing decision.
And I feel like the responsibility often falls on the Electrosonics of the world to be able to break down that barrier between fun and excitement and also education, right? And make it so that it's not just a distracting, pretty space, but a space that has intentional functionality behind the technology as much as an aesthetic that is memorable and an experience that is memorable. So, pull from your strategy with your answer here and maybe some of your specific projects you've worked on in the past, but how do you attempt to break that barrier down to have an experience that is all three, that is fun, is excitement, and education?
Yeah, wow. So, if we break it down, fun, if we were to put a random list of 100 activities together, from let's say household chores to vacation, and we asked a group of people, which do you find fun? They're probably going to align. So, we have a good sense of what people find fun, going on vacation versus not fun, doing household chores. Excitement, I think, is a bit tricky. It's kind of like, let's take a surprise birthday party. Certainly exciting, but for some, it may depend which side of the surprise you're on. Memorable experiences, it's about exceeding expectation. When that is done, that can be an exciting time. Education is certainly the most important aspect from a business perspective. Are the customers learning about your brand? How is it going to help them? How can it help them help their customers? So then tracking education, are they in fact learning? Are they becoming more educated on your product? So to bring it all together, when we look at a museum space, for example, they are experts in having fun, exciting educational programming. We did a museum in Idaho, amazing exhibits, some even as simple as the potato, but potato being used for power sources, turning on a light bulb. It's education, it's fun, it's a bit exciting when the light bulb finally goes off. We've done a lot of work in the Smithsonian and the National Mall. I think as a briefing program, if we look to museums at how they pull together fun, excitement, and education, their tour groups range from grade school, high school, college students, PhDs, to the adults accompanying those grade school children. And I'd be confident in saying that every one of those people in that demographic is having fun. They are excited about something. Not every museum is of everybody's core interest, but the way that they pull it together, the way that they welcome people into the space, typically a grand foyer, a large entrance. They look at an interest curve. Don't put the T-Rex skeleton in the lobby. Let's put it in the back of the museum so people work their way up to an amazing display of an ancient dinosaur. So I think if we look at it that way, it's at the heart of what every center should be focused on. It's exciting, it's fun, it's educational.
So if we look at now some vision for what role the briefing center is going to fill moving forward. I know we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but I want to get more granular on some of the specific processes or use cases that businesses could get out of their briefing center. So what roles do you see briefing centers filling in 2021 for the business as well as the experience landscape? And what are these businesses needing out of their physical spaces like a briefing center?
Yeah, so I don't think the role of the briefing center itself will change much, but I am interested to watch what happens next with the spaces surrounding the briefing center. So we've watched, over the past year, massive changes in corporate real estate, from leases, purchases, selling off, canceling leases, headquarters changing cities. But all the while, we've maintained, the largest percentage of workers performing as needed from the comfort of their homes. Perhaps a hybrid type of space will emerge, something between an external facing briefing center or an internal brainstorming, mind mapping, co-working space. There's a lot of elements of a briefing program that engage their customers externally to drive to a solution, to develop, a new application for a product. In my opinion, there's no reason that couldn't also be a benefit internally for these employees who have been working from home, who are also just as interested in that simple human interaction that we were talking about earlier. Within my teams, we've talked a lot about the convenience of working from home, but how it'd be so nice to all get together a few times a month for a focused working session. And then we can go back to our home offices and build on those ideas, ideate, work, develop, and then come back for an in-person session later. I think the briefing center has always been a perfect curated environment for external communications. So I'm really interested in how that may influence future internal communications.
All right, we're going to talk technology now, probably one of your favorite topics. What are some of your favorite technology integrations that you've seen work well to get employees and guests excited about their briefing centers? Go ahead and lay out your favorites that you've worked with and why.
Again, from the perspective of an integrator, there's never that one piece of technology that works, but it's how are all of these pieces of technology working to provide a better holistic experience. So if we look at something as simple as your Outlook calendar for scheduling meetings, if we can schedule meetings in a way that offsets our commute time, where we're not commuting at a peak hour, but rather, say 10 or 11 a.m., by having a dynamic scheduling system internally to kind of group meetings together and say, Wednesday is my day to have meetings. I'll come into the office, I'll do a big long sprint of meetings, and then I go back. There's interesting things from that perspective, from ingress and egress of spaces. It's likely already based around an employee badge, but what else can that badge help with? If you're a newer employee, can it help you with wayfinding? Can it lead you to a temporary workstation or a hotel desk? Will it inform you that a space has been cleaned? There's a lot of, so those are kind of functional aspects of how do we meet, when do we meet, how do we get there? Looking inside of, conference rooms and briefing centers, there's, technology from Barco and Crestron and X2O that's all about hybrid environments. And I'm here in a space, lots of digital screens, viewers, guests, participants, practically from all over the world. How do we interact and engage with each other? Digital whiteboarding is a big one. differences in just making a home office better audio, better video quality, a bit more engaging. There's so much to look at, but also, from an audio perspective, sound masking and making a space feel as comfortable as it did when you were sitting at home, and hopefully it was quiet, no children, no dogs barking, that sort of thing. But certainly a lot of interesting technology from a cleaning and sanitization standpoint. And I think a lot of planning, meeting timing, a lot of that stuff is going to get a lot easier here going forward.
And when we talk about technology integrations, usually we're talking about the technology that supports the experience once you're already there. And I think that's expected, right? The briefing center experience typically begins when a customer walks in the door. But I'm curious, do you know any ways to break down the barriers before as well as after the in-person experience to capture that attention more holistically? If so, what's the value of that? And also, does technology support that, and how?
Yeah, so if we talk about the pre-experience, it's really about comfort. One of my biggest annoyances in visiting a new space is that it's new. I've never been there. I don't know what it really looks like. I don't quite know where to park. I don't know where I'm going to have to check in or how I'm going to have to do that. In a high profile briefing, a lot of those steps are taken care of for the client, but new technologies are going to allow for this type of curated experience at really every level, including the employees. We've seen a lot of good cases of people sending out, pre-branded experience bundles. So, it comes delivered to you. It's branded with the organization's style and messaging, but it also could have, a card for you. It could have an AR application that you can have on your phone where you are actually able to see in volumetric space what the building looks like. It can show you where your reserved parking space is. It can show you the path to get from your parking space into the front door. Even at doctor's offices now, they're allowing you to check in from your mobile app. So it goes right to the front desk. Hi, I'm in the parking lot. I'm ready when you are. They notify you, and then you walk into the space. So the pre-experience, there's certainly a lot to be done there that can help with just, again, that comfort level, that ease of entry, reducing that kind of stress. We've talked a lot, of course, during the meetings, how technology can play into that. But when people leave, from a business standpoint, the post experience is really what defines the working relationship. Staying engaged, staying top of mind, remaining supportive, helpful, informative. All the work that takes place after the experience is how we all look to gain brand loyalty, long-term partners, or clients. And although most of that is typically, web-based or outbound marketing, those sorts of things, again, perhaps a takeaway trinket, whether that's an AR thing or some type of device. I've mentioned a project here in San Francisco where as soon as you purchase a seat, you are given a light cube, you plug it into a big giant light bright board, and now you have you have had agency and had an effect on the space for everyone that comes after you. The Crayola experience down in Florida does all of this very well. Take a chance to Google that. Their pre-experience leads into what you do while you're there in the space, designing your own crayon, making your own drawing. You are then given a code where you go home later and you continue to interact with what you created while you were there. So to me, again, if we draw from museums and those types of public entertainment spaces, I think we can apply a lot of that to the briefing world as well.
All right, Sean, I think we're just about done with our conversation. So I've just got one main question for you, and then we can open up the floor for if there's anything that you want to mention that we haven't broken down yet. But basically, let's peer into the crystal ball a little bit. As we get deeper into the 2021 business year, we're in month 3 now, so we can't really be doing, as the year starts, we're
Right.
deep now. We're knee deep. When is going to be the best time to build this type of multi-layered briefing experience? We have some context around probably midsummer, having finally mass vaccination at scale. And different states are lifting up their mask and business regulations. For example, we're based out of Texas, and just this week we lifted mask mandates as well as business regulations around capacity in physical spaces. So to some degree, Texas is just going to be back to normal, and the virus still continues, but there is some optimism that vaccines will curb it in the future. So that's just some context to lay out where we're at. As we push deeper into 2021, when do we do this? When is it time to build this type of briefing experience, and why?
All good points, and I think I like to say that the time to build a custom, experience focused space is whenever you are ready. And really what I want to impart on that is when it comes to designing an experience or upgrading an existing experience, that has to be continual. There's no better time than today to be thinking about how is the experience going to take place? How was it before? How is it going to be in the future? If you're designing or looking to open and build your own experience center, it is always best to start the design as soon as possible. Good design takes time, but it's worth the investment, financially and just your time commitment to make sure that when you look at how do we want to build this space, why are we doing it? Who is it you're going to invite? What is it they need to learn? Why are they there? How are we going to go about that? And does that space holistically support your business needs? Is it fun? Is it exciting? Is it engaging? All of those things can be considered if you give yourself enough time to design it. It's so crucial to not rush something that is of so much importance. So, again, the time to build it is whenever you're ready. The time to look to design it is as soon as you want to start having the conversation.
And like I promised, I'll open up the floor to you now, Sean, as we wrap. Any other main points that you want to communicate about the future of briefing centers, the technology supporting them, use cases, anything we haven't touched on?
Yeah, I think it's always just important to say, it's an amazing it's an amazing environment and group of people that build, design, manage these briefing centers. We're all in this together. We're all pretty excited about what's to come. I think there's been a lot of hardship through COVID, but there's so much that we've learned, not only about ourselves, but how do we interact with people. And there's ways to facilitate that. There's amazing architects and experienced designers that really understand the nuance of human interaction. And then on the technology side, human computer interaction, and how does that come together? You are not alone. There's amazing amounts of professional expertise out there to help you. These are the kinds of conversations that we like to have so we can, play our part in making this industry as good as possible. It's a lot to be excited about. And if there's anything you're concerned about with, designing, building, supporting a briefing center, we are more than happy to help answer those questions.
Sean McChesney, thank you so much for your insights today on the podcast. This has been a great discussion, very timely, very focused. Again, we've been chatting with Sean McChesney. He is the resident briefing center expert and an experienced technology consultant with Electrosonic. And Sean, if folks want to find out more about some of the work Electrosonic is doing in this space or get in touch with you and the team, how can they do so? How can they learn more?
Absolutely. Electrosonic.com is the best place to go. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Sean McChesney. Be more than happy to help.
Fantastic. Sean, thanks again.
Thank you, Daniel.
And thank you, everyone, for listening to today's episode of Fusion, an Electrosonic podcast. If you like what you heard and want to listen to previous episodes, make sure you head to our website, electrosonic.com, and subscribe to Fusion on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I'm your host, Daniel Litwin, the voice of B2B. Till next time.